yourself in if they're looking for you. Communication is still very badly affected, and of course this is having disastrous economic effects there as well. There have been some bloggers who tried to rebalance the Chinese media coverage, because if you only get the Chinese press, you don't really know there ever were any peaceful demonstrations to start with, and you don't know about the extent of Han Chinese violence either, or the details of the September stuff. Some of the bloggers reported two of the very prominent Uyghur incidents. The journalist survived his beating by a mob. Mirza Allen was killed. Very famous Uyghur singer. And nobody in the rest of mainland China heard about that unless they happened to be those bloggers. Both of whom were detained for reporting it. They're only for a couple of months, and nothing very terrible happened to them. They reported it. They got out eventually. But the Chinese public has been left with a view of these events, and it's all about Uyghur violence against Han Chinese. None of it the other way. Just a very simple, one-sided portrayal. Actually, much like the portrayal of the Tibetan events. I was in China during that in the spring of 2008. And if you only saw the Chinese media, you would have a totally distorted version of what went on there. And the Western stuff was blacked out. Every time Tibet came on BBC World, the screen went blank while Tibet stuff was going on. And every time that happened, I'd text my sister in the UK and say, what just happened? What was just on BBC World? What did I miss? Sometimes very late at night, I think the guy maybe gone off for a cup of tea, and you'd get half an item before someone realised and hit the button. Usually they're quite good. And I also, just as an experiment, this is again during the Tibet stuff, I bought all the foreign news magazines I could get hold of in Beijing and looked to see what they had in them about Tibet. Some of them, Newsweek, had big pictures from Lhasa because they fitted the Chinese narrative of what was going on. So they showed Chinese riot police crashing in clouds of tear gas and monks kicking in shop windows, and that was okay because that fit the picture that they were putting across. But any actual article which discussed Tibet, even one in Spiegel, I think, which said that the Olympics, China shouldn't lose the Olympics because this was actually pro-China, they'd all just been ripped out. I've still got all the magazines with them. I mean, as censorship goes, it's crude, but it is effective, because nobody would get to read that stuff. I mean, the Chinese press, it was never there to start with, and certainly on Chinese language television, it was never there. Strike hard campaigns. I don't like these. If you have crossed the interests of powerful people in China, it's not easy to get a fair trial anyway. If there's a strike hard campaign on, you might as well forget about it. There's a slogan, quick arrest, quick trial, quick results. Strike hard is all about, don't make too much fuss about the legal niceties, let's just be really mean to crime. And crime and citizen separate as well. Lawyers, when strike hard is on, if defendants even have them, are told to, they've got to work closely with the police and prosecutors and don't get too hung up on details. That is an actual quote from instructions to lawyers during the strike hard campaign. There are quotas. Quotas always mean injustice. If you've got to find a certain number of people guilty, some women are not guilty. That's very simple. But there's all this stress on the volume of cases handled. I often serve as an expert witness in asylum cases, and once a judge pulled me up when I mentioned the number of criminal cases there are in China that go to court in a year. It's about 4 million. And she said, well, no, they can't handle that many. They couldn't physically have enough courts to handle that many. In China, a trial on capital charges when your life is at stake can last a few hours. A trial with multiple defendants who are liable for the death penalty has been known to go by in less than an hour. And individuals can sometimes be sentenced in the time it takes to read out the name and address here. So very, very quick. And strike hard speeds it all up even more. China, in theory, distinguishes between international terrorism, violent acts against Chinese rule, and campaigns for separatism, for greater economic and cultural rights and so on. But actually, it always mentions them together. So it always links them together in the public mind and treats them pretty much equally in practice. Very, very harshly. Again, I've said the death penalty comedies. They still even have mass sentencing right now in Xinjiang and other places in China. Stopped doing that quite a few years ago. You would never see one of those in the major eastern cities anymore. But they do still happen in some places. Xinjiang also, as well as executions, seems to account for a high proportion of convictions on state security laws. China abolished the offence of counter-revolution in the late 1990s, 1996, I think, when they brought in the new criminal law. And they did this for two reasons. One is if you have a law against counter-revolution, you will eventually be called upon to explain how the CCP government is now revolutionary, and this had become an embarrassing question sometime before 1996, I guess. So you want to sweep that under the carpet. And also, if you're convicting people of counter-revolution, by definition they are a political offender, aren't they? They're a political prisoner, because that's the revolution, is the political struggle. So, since then, it's Articles 102 to 113 of the Chinese criminal law, if you want to go look it up. They cover offences against state security, but it's a typical Chinese law. It's very broadly drawn and not very specific. And you can be convicted under state security laws, even if what you did never happened, if you just planned it or talked about it. One labour activist I know from northeast China, he was involved in the 1989 movement, and he did a few years for that. When he came out, he couldn't get a job anywhere in northeast China, because all state-owned enterprises, they couldn't touch it. So he started living in a bar with the family savings. And when the 2002 labour unrest kicked off there in the northeast, he tried to help the families of some of the guys who were in prison, the Liaoyang 2. And he and a bunch of his friends were going to organise a demonstration on behalf of their rights as prisoners, because their family were being denied visits and couldn't send them food and medicine, which is against the law. So they're going to have a protest about this. They printed up some leaflets, and these leaflets were stored in the storeroom of his noodle bar. The protest never happened. No one but him and his printer and his mates ever saw those leaflets. He got 8 years for that. I mean, admittedly he had a record, but not for anything violent. 8 years under state security laws. So you don't have to demonstrate that state security has been harmed, or even that anything happened, and you can still be found guilty. So it's very, very easy to convict people. 9 executions so far and 3 suspended death sentences. Suspended ones usually don't get carried out. They are commuted, and after 2 years then you just, serving life. But these defendants, they did have lawyers. They met them for 10 minutes before they went on trial for their lives. The lawyers were chosen for them, and they did not confer in private. The police were listening in. It was done by telephone through the glass screen in a way which you've probably seen in very American television programs. I would put it to you that when you are on trial for your life, even if you are a terrorist, that's not a very good guarantee that you'll be convicting the right people when it is actually a question of life or death. The death penalties were, of course, referred to the Supreme Court, because they have to now, and they were batted back, approved, I think, the next day. All the appeals were rejected. And that was that. So sorry to think end very cheerfully. Nothing I talk about it does. A few weeks ago I was talking about human trafficking between China and the UK, and thoroughly depressed a bunch of people in Chatham House. But